Hey guys, today we are starting right now in my mom's raised bed garden. She's working on another side of the garden. I'm working over here and gonna plant some onions, gonna get some raised beds ready. So mom's raised bed garden, I put in it's probably been 5 years now. We used to always have a traditional in-ground garden, and then after working with my raised beds, mom kind of wanted to use them for herself too. So we built her raised beds and she's really been enjoying them. Some of the soil over the years now has settled to the point where we definitely want to add some. While I like to top dress with just compost every year, it was enough in some of the beds that we really wanted to do something a little bit more. And as you know, the right soil mix is key not only for flowers in a pot or for container gardening, but it's also essential for raised bed gardening. And when I put my raised beds together, I usually start with like a 60% topsoil to 30% good organic compost to 10% of a soil lightener, which is a great mix. But sometimes we don't have the ability or the time or the resources to make our mix for ourselves. So today I'm actually using a mix. So I thought I would show you what I'm using to top the beds off, to fill them in and really get started planting. And then we're just gonna plant some onions right in them, which I love onions. So mom's garden consists of 12 of these 4 by 10 foot raised beds that we did with 4 by 4 cedar timbers. And she does just like I do. Over here, she has some of her cold crops started. I start all these from seed. And we're right now having unseasonably warm weather. So instead of putting our jug around them that we do to keep them extra warm, we instead have just a tile around them. This is old field tile, it's not used anymore, but this protects them from the wind like we're having today and from too much sun. It actually shades them a little bit because here in this extra warm weather, you can kind of see that they want that protection. So that's what's in all of these. So that's just like I do. This is where I learned it from. So now over here is the beds I'm talking about, and you can see they're already top dressed. And what we did was we just used the Espoma, just great raised bed mix. So raised bed mixes can be a hit or a miss. You definitely want to know what's going into them, and that's why I feel really good about the Espoma one. I really like the mix they have together. They also have earthworm castings in it, which I really like. Earthworm castings for a good soil mix, that really helps. I've actually added worm castings just to my raised beds. So having it in here already is great. Organic, obviously, for me is essential. I'm gonna do as much as I can to have good soil for my vegetables and things to grow in. So that starts with what they're actually gonna have their roots in. So we actually just emptied a few bags on top now of all of this soil that was here. And if you look how beautiful it is. It has a nice mix of some compost, and then it's like a nice mix of soil. You can see the little bit of perlite in it, which is what I have in my raised beds anyway. So perlite is right here. It's this great white pumicey stone that really helps lighten and aerate the soil and allows roots to really easily go through it. So I'm really excited about this. We'll maybe go over later, then I'll show you the compost that I make and put on my garden when I just want to top dress it. But this is a really great option to fill new raised beds with, but also to just top dress with if you feel like you need a good amount of soil and maybe don't want just compost. Because remember, compost is not soil, it's compost. It's more of a organic matter that will add to the health of your soil, but it's not soil by itself. So what we're gonna do now is do onions in these, and I have 3 types of onions. I have candy onions, which we love. These are starts, aren't they beautiful? Instead of bulbs, I like to do starts, but it just depends what you can find. And then along with candy, I have Walla Walla. I always love Walla Walla. They get really nice and big. And then I always do a purple one, so I think I'm doing blush this year, yeah, which I really like. I'm getting really excited because usually this would be just about the right time to plant them, about 4 weeks before our last spring frost. Right now they're getting planted in what feels like summer. So usually I would plant these in, more of like a mid-spring, early spring, 4 to 6 weeks before that last frost. But today they're getting planted in 80-degree weather, and that's just how it is. So before I plant these onions, I am going to top dress the bed with some Garden Tone, which is what I'll always top dress most beds with, but then also the Biotone. So that's gonna help those roots really get set in, really gonna feed the roots. And then the Garden Tone is just gonna be a nice all-purpose organic feed all throughout their growing season. It's really subtle, it's really just a nice nutrients, and it's organic. Since it's food, it really matters what you put into it. So I'm gonna top dress with these, sprinkle them around, then we can start planting. So what you'll notice is I worked that Garden Tone and the Biotone just into the top couple inches of the soil. You don't need to work it way down deep. I think that's kind of a myth. We think a lot of times with any type of fertilizer, organic or not. And instead what you want to do is just mix it in a couple top inches, because rain and weather and just Mother Nature is going to work that down. And remember, the plants we're planting have very non-existent or shallow root systems to begin with. It's like this right here, since it's just kind of a bare root dry start, it has no roots. So if you put the fertilizer down too deep, it's not going to do anything. So now we're going to start planting the onions, which you can see are pretty simple. I go through and I just kind of take them all apart just so I can start seeing them all. Some of them will have more roots than others, but don't let that worry you. The big thing with onions is you want to make sure they have plenty of space. What I want to do is make sure I'm only planting them about 1 inch deep. You don't want to plant them way too deep. Only about 1 inch, because then it's going to have a really good amount of room to develop a nice big bulb. You want to go about 4 to 6 inches apart to make sure they have ample space depending on what variety you're growing. And we're just going to pop them right in. So since this is a fresh bed mix, just that raised bed mix, obviously it's going to be very easy to plant them. Then I will want to water it, because that will set the soil a little bit more. And we also have rain coming up in the next couple days. So I'm just going to go through and start putting these in. And remember, you can measure it off if you need to. I do have a tool somewhere. I might go get that so I can measure my spacing and know where I want to plop them. So you can see now I got all of these planted. That's just the one variety. So this whole bed is going to be all 3 varieties put together. And I use this tool that just spaces them evenly. It's kind of nice and it works pretty well. And then you can kind of evenly make your rows. Now you do want to go through them as you're setting them in and make sure they're in good shape, that they're not rotten, that they're not going to go bad. I did find one over there that was rotten, so I just exchanged it for a good one. Then I have a couple little ones left over that if I have room, I'll push in. But now I'm going to go through and plant the rest of the other 2 varieties. Then all these will be done. So hopefully it will rain this weekend. Obviously I can water these right now though too. And you know, the thing is, onions like to be in raised beds. If you don't put them in raised beds, that's fine. But if you're gonna put them in ground, make sure you kind of make large hilled rows out of them. They like to be like 4 to 6 inches up out in a nice big mound. That's gonna help them develop a really good bulb and let their roots have a nice, kind of more dry soil. They like to dry out really well, and if they're too deep, sometimes they're just laden to get wet and they don't develop a nice head of onion. So Mom came and helped and we finished this whole bed. You can see the little green tops. Now as it rains, you're gonna be amazed at how quick these actually sprout up and start growing. Sometimes what we do, if we have a few extras at the end in our spacing and we have like a few extra we just wanna use, we plant them closer together. And then as these get big, we'll take out every other one and just use it as a smaller onion, and that will allow more spacing in between. So if you kind of want to cram them in at the end, just know you need to pluck those out and thin them as they start getting size and just use them as an early onion. But now what I thought we could do is go right over to the strawberry bed, because we're kind of reworking that too. So over here in the garden, we have 2 strawberry beds. This one is really established. You can see our soaker hose is sitting on top. We'll probably put that in here again. And this one, what we do with usually is after the season, after we're done picking, these are all June bearing strawberries. So you can get ever bearing strawberries or June bearing. We find June bearing overall give you more of a crop than ever bearing. So what we do is once these are done at the end of June usually, we'll trim them off. We'll actually remove a section of them. And then for the rest of the year, they send new runners. And that's where you're gonna get your most berries on those newer plants. So this bed is established, it's beautiful, it's doing great. This one over here has not been doing as good, so we're reworking it. We pulled up all the strawberries and we're gonna start them pretty much as new strawberries. So Mom was going through and already ripping up all the strawberries and separating them out evenly, pretty much treating them just like a new seedling you would buy. So what we have here are clumps of strawberries, which are actually looking really healthy, really good. You can see how nice it is. We started by filling the bed, topping it off with that same raised bed mix, that Espoma mix, which right away I think is gonna help. As we're planting them, I'm making sure to put biotone into them. So I'm just fertilizing with biotone, and then we're gonna fertilize the whole bed at the end with some berrytone, just because it really does help production. So what you can see here is we're spacing them out evenly, and what strawberries do is they send runners. So as these grow, these plants will send a long stem eventually, and it will start a new plant. And that's how strawberries regenerate over their life. Eventually, the old original plant kind of goes by the wayside. It doesn't produce as much. And so that's why every so often you take out old plants and allow the newer plants to keep going. And it's just a life cycle over time. So what we're doing now is going through and just planting these. You can see we've kind of set them around, and we're just making sure we plant them. So when I dig my hole, you can see it's just a really simple process with this nice soil. I am gonna grab my biotone over here, and this is what I'm gonna make sure to put into each hole. Now you can also just, on that bed if you want to, like I did with the onions, you could do the whole bed in it, but I like to sometimes just put it in the hole, plant around it, and then these are just like seedlings, and so now you can see there's tons of new growth on here already. They're gonna send out lots of new plants. So we're gonna get all this bed worked up, we're gonna start planting it, and then we'll fertilize. Okay, we just got them all done, and I wanted to show you the runners I was talking about. Over here, there's one, and if we look really close here, right here. So if you notice, this is the original plant, and it has then this long stem that comes off, and right here is a runner with some roots. That is how strawberries regenerate and start new plants. So you plant that little runner, and it's its own plant now. So that's why eventually over time, these keep filling in really easily, and you can eventually take out some of this so they can keep filling in. Now, just for a nice fertilizer, every year I always add Berrytone. You know, this is one of those things that if you're like me, year to year, you either don't do fertilizer or you feel like it takes too much time and you just don't usually get to it. I find it really makes a big difference, especially with berries. Berries take energy and nutrients from the soil, and so replenishing that in a really healthy and safe way, like an organic fertilizer, really helps replenish and just give them the nutrients they need to produce even better berries. So I'm gonna sprinkle this on, which is pretty simple. It happens to be that for this bed, it works really well that one of these packages is all you need. So I just sprinkle it on all over and then work it in just with my hands and then water it really well to just get it kind of down in there. Now you could also just sprinkle this in each hole if you wanted to, but I find actually just sprinkling it over the top, it will kind of spread it out more evenly in this case, and then all the work is done. So we finished with the bed of strawberries. Mom's gonna water it really well. We have that fertilizer just worked into the top couple inches. She just gave me a handful of asparagus, so I'm gonna make that tonight for dinner. Now I thought we could go home and I'll show the compost I make and I use on my garden beds and how it's similar to a good, just great raised bed mix, but also has a little bit of different nutrients. So it just depends what you're looking for and what you're looking to add to your beds. So I'm back in my vegetable garden, which is also raised beds. I have much larger raised beds. I built mine, I had in-ground beds this size. They're about 4 feet by 24 foot each. I have 6 of them. One of them though is rhubarb and garlic. Another one is asparagus and shallots. So really I have 4 beds that rotate yearly with the normal vegetable garden crops. And they're a little long, personally, that's why I like Mom's a lot better. But I thought I'd talk about the differences between home compost, what you want to top your beds with versus when they need something more. Because this year, I just need to kind of top my beds, but it does make a difference on what you use. So what I have right beside me is my homemade compost. Now, this compost, I have about three piles at a time, and they work on a 3-year rotation. It takes about 2 to 3 years for a pile to be ready. I turn it often with a skid loader, which is a piece of machinery, because it's large piles that are just sitting out there. And what you do is when it's ready, it should be nice and small. Look at this. This is beautiful, it's rich, it is small particles, nothing big. You can see it's broken down into small pieces, and you shouldn't have a foul odor. There is, you know, turkey manure in here. There's leaf mulch that comes off my trees, but all that should work down with no smell after a few years. That's when you know it's ready, when it's a nice rich, and remember, this is not soil, this is compost. So it's gonna add good organic matter to your garden, but it will not add soil. So I use this as a top dressing, but I don't like to use this where I'm gonna necessarily plant just seeds, because sometimes my compost can be a little piecey and it can be hard to actually plant seeds in. For seed planting, I like to use that raised bed mix. So I'll kind of show you the differences here on the garden. So here on this bed, I have my compost. I put it on about a week ago, so it's dried out definitely on top now. And you can see it's really easy to work with. This is where I'm planting seedlings, like I have lettuce that I started from seeds indoors, so it has nice head starts. And I have this planted directly in here, and it's just about a 2-inch layer before you get to the soil itself. And this is often what I'll top a bed with every year. Now this is just a raised bed mix. And you can see it has more of a soil-like texture. This is a lot, to me, easier, this mix, to plant seeds directly in. So on this area of the bed where I'm gonna be planting my rows of radish, of spinach, arugula, I'm gonna actually plant it within this raised bed mix, because you can see over here, as it dries out, my compost can sometimes, it needs to be broken, like I need to go through and cultivate it almost to make it easier. These mixes where they're in bags are a lot easier, and you can get really nice rows in them. That's what I'm gonna use. Now, don't fret if you don't have homemade compost. You can buy really good quality compost. I oftentimes will use, if I don't have enough, the Land Sea Compost. It has a nice texture to it. Again, if you look at it close to the raised bed mix, there's definitely differences in it. You see a little bit more kind of a mulch-like substance in the compost, and the soil has more of a soil-like texture to it. So both of them work great. It just kind of depends if you really want to add a lot to your beds. I would definitely add a raised bed mix. If you kind of just want to amend your beds, I would add a compost, because that's more of an amendment. So I have all the raised bed mix laid out, and I did amend it with a couple bags of that Land Sea compost, which I could have just used my home compost too, but I'll probably preserve that and put that more on. Well, so when I don't have enough, I like to put my home compost often on my perennial beds too, so I'll probably do that with some of it. But what I'm doing now is just right in this raised bed mix, because it's so easy, is I'm just planting my radishes now. So I have my radish seed right here in hand, and I use a tool to kind of mark off and space my holes evenly. It makes it easier for me just because I can be an uneven planter otherwise. Mom always uses a ruler. When we were young, she had a big garden tape measure that she would put across her long rows to make sure they're perfect. But if you look down in here, I'm putting just one seed per hole. Radish, this is a smaller variety. I'm doing the early scarlet globe. They can be planted pretty close together. So I'm gonna plant them down in these holes, super simple. You know, if you plant one seed per hole, you don't have to worry as much about thinning them. If you just do the sprinkle method, which is often how I would have done it, you then have to go through and thin them. And it really makes a big difference if you thin them versus not thinning them. So I'm gonna go through and plant now just a few rows, and then we'll be done. You'll notice I spaced them the rows a distance apart, about 6 inches, and that's because here in about a week or two when they come up and really start growing, I'll successively plant a row in between them, so as I start harvesting that first row, a new row can be coming. That way I can get plantings kind of throughout the spring. Again, we're having an extra warm week this week, but we will go back to cool weather when these cool season crops thrive. This is a little too warm for a lot of them, but we'll be getting out of this weather hopefully soon and going back to that earlier spring weather that hopefully we'll have. So I hope you can see now that gardening comes in all shapes and sizes. That's what I always say. We started at my mom's garden, so you could see really what it's like over there with different raised beds and using only a raised bed mix. Came over to mine where I used a mix of my home compost, raised bed mixes. It can kind of all work together, and it can really work for you, and that's the important part. I know not everyone can always make compost, so buying good quality compost will make all the difference. You don't have to make it at home, but your plants will be so far ahead with any good organic compost. They will taste better, grow better, be happier. So as always, thanks for watching my videos. Share them around, because not only does it help me, it helps everyone else see gardening is doable and easy for everyone. And until next time, happy gardening.